They say integrity is priceless. Yet, these days, a certificate of it costs less than a crumpled receipt in your pocket. Asterisk, I remember a small charity event I attended years ago. It was simple wooden chairs, the scent of fresh tea, an old microphone that kept cutting in and out. The room was filled with people who, at least for that evening, wanted to believe in goodness. Near the entrance was a table. On it, piles of glossy certificates, printed in gold and green, stamped with an official seal. The paper was thick, the kind you could frame. If you donated a certain amount, one of these certificates would be handed to you. It didn't matter if you'd ever shown kindness before. It didn't matter if you'd ever lifted a finger for anyone in need. All that mattered was the envelope you passed across the table. I watched as someone slipped a check from his leather wallet, smiled for the cameras, and received his framed proof of ethics. Later, I overheard him berating a waiter in the parking lot, his voice sharp, his words cruel, but the certificate wallet remained pristine. A testament to a morality that existed only on paper. That was the day I learned that, in certain circles, morality has a price tag, and it's far cheaper than we think. A receipt for a dinner can show more real sacrifice than these so-called ethical credentials. At least a dinner receipt proves you were there, you paid, you consumed. A certificate of morality, it proves nothing but your ability to pose for a photograph. It's strange how we've learned to outsource even our virtues. We've turned compassion into something that can be packaged, sold, and hung on a wall, like buying a bouquet of flowers for someone you've wronged, hoping the petals will cover the cracks you've made. The more I've seen of the world, the more I realize the appearance of goodness is now more valuable than goodness itself. An image, carefully curated, carries more weight than a life quietly lived in integrity. In business, there are companies that proudly display their ethical supplier badges while their workers in distant countries earn less in a month than the cost of the CEO's time. In politics, there are leaders who stand on stages, speaking of justice and equality, only to sign documents the next morning that betray both. In our personal lives, too, we sometimes slip into this economy of image posting a photo of charity, work we did for one afternoon, while ignoring the suffering of people right next to us. The certificate becomes the thing we chase, not the virtue itself, not the hard, often invisible work of actually being kind, or fair, or honest. I once met an elderly man who had no certificates, no medals, no plaques. He'd worked as a janitor for most of his life. Every day, he cleaned the corridors of a Hispano where people barely noticed him. He never made speeches about compassion. He never asked for recognition. But I learned from one of the nurses that in winter, he would quietly leave gloves and scarves in the waiting room for patients' families who couldn't afford them. He bought them himself with the coins he collected from recycling bottles. He never told anyone. He didn't need to. If there was such a thing as a true certificate of morality, his name would be written on it in the smallest, humblest letters, the kind you can only read if you bother to look closely. But here's the hard truth. The world rarely bothers to look closely. It likes loud declarations. It likes things that can be framed, posted, shared. And so, the quiet, genuine acts, ones that carry real weight, are invisible. A philosopher once said, "What is right is not always popular, and what is popular is not always right." We nod when we hear it. We share the quote online. And then, often without realizing, we go back to valuing the popular over the right. Why is that? Perhaps because real goodness is demanding. It doesn't fit neatly into a certificate template. It asks for patience, for sacrifice, for a willingness to be misunderstood. It asks for silence in a world addicted to noise. Buying a piece of paper is easy. Living a life that matches it, that's the harder path. And maybe that's why the paper is cheap, because it's the easy part. Sometimes I wonder if morality could be measured the way we measure weight or height. Would we still hand it out so casually? If integrity glowed faintly around a person, like a light, would we still need to print certificates to prove it? Or would the truth be too uncomfortable because some of the most decorated people would stand in darkness, while the invisible ones, the janitors, the nurses, the quiet neighbors, shine? In the end, I think of that charity event often, not because of the certificates, but because of the tea lady in the corner. She was elderly, her back slightly bent, pouring cup after cup for guests who rarely looked her in the eye. When I thanked her, she smiled in a way that felt like an entire conversation, gentle, knowing, unpretentious. She had no certificate to prove she was good. She didn't need one. She was living proof. Asterisk. So perhaps the question isn't how to make these certificates worth more than a receipt. Perhaps the question is why we feel the need to prove goodness at all. And maybe, just maybe, the truest measure of virtue is what we do when no one is there to hand us a piece of paper.